So a year back, I made a short and rather amateurish video about a game called Endless Dark, where I recounted a run I had in it and explained the basic mechanics and slight observations I had about it. And at the end of said video, I recommended anyone who found the game slightly interesting to play it for themselves. Now, a year has passed, and the game has officially entered 1.0, and its story has finally fully been released for us to enjoy. I have already finished the game, and gotten a specific ending which I will spoil, so please take this as your spoiler warning and click off. I highly recommend you to play this game for yourself and to check out my previous video if you would like to hear more. As you see, this video is quite long and the style of video is quite different compared to the other videos I have produced. Nevertheless, I will try my absolute best to dissect the themes and story of Endless Dark to the best of my abilities. We will be going through the game chronologically. So where else better to begin the story than Act 1 of Arc 1, Contingency. We awake as Robbie on Cycle 1, this adorable little robo-custodian aboard a sleeper cryostasis ship, and our task in terms of gameplay is to travel 30 in-game turns without losing our passengers and or killing ourselves in a myriad of ways, while also maintaining the several important functionalities of the ship. For example, the engine and its individual thrusters, the shielding systems and the cryopods themselves, or how about the reactor, the metaphorical and kinda literal heart of the ship, keeping everything alive and powered. Would be a damn shame if it were to, I don't know, begin failing. And so begins our very first arc, the Contingency Protocol. On the start of this cycle, our report for output of power delivered by the reactor has taken a deep dive, giving us less than usual power surplus supply, which is not good in the slightest. And we are presented with two choices. One is to investigate why this is happening, and option 2 is to flat out ignore it and abort the arc entirely. So of course, we choose to investigate what's wrong with the reactor. But once we arrive, all systems read nominal. Even after running diagnostics, everything come back A-OK. A false alarm perhaps? Whatever the case, it is not a problem, and we continue doing tasks and making sure the ship doesn't fall apart around us, and return back to our charging cradle and rest for the cycle. And once we wake up, yet again, the reactor is not producing the normal amount of power it should be, and worse, it is not pinging us or setting off an alarm to alert us to this. If this goes unfixed, this could lead to an overall reactor failure, which is plainly put, terrible for us, and the occupants in the ship currently, so yet again, we head back to the reactor. After yet another examination, we now realize something is off with the Eternals itself, and not the software surrounding it. And even more alarmingly, the ambient heat that radiates from the core is less than usual, so this leaves two options before us and neither is comforting. The radioactive material itself is failing, or at least degrading for an unknown reason, or said heat and output is being siphoned away to some other part of the ship. While this isn't as bad as the first option, we are equally unsure if it's on purpose or not. Nevertheless, we have two potential options to take. One is to disconnect the power terminals, damaging the power reactor itself, but giving us an idea on what's going on, or we can crunch some numbers and see if there is a pattern, but this will take longer, but will not damage the reactor itself. And so, I chose the first option. At the beginning of yet another cycle, our number crunching has completed, and the information it gives us is quite something. After said number crunching and data analysis, we find out the radioactive material itself is not degrading and or failing, which is good, but this doesn't explain where the excess heat and power is being diverted to. So now we must take drastic measures and open the core itself to see what's happened. This, of course, will expose our chassis to extreme amounts of ionizing radiation, which, without safety equipment to shield us to it, would basically fry us inside out. Thankfully, we've gained a brand new schematic to produce and use, which will harden the chassis against the radiation threat, and so to the replicator we go to produce said schematic. Once the protection has been donned, we can finally expose the service panel and glance inside. Now bathed in green glow and radiation, we can finally look inside this beast, only to find an upgrade module that is compatible with our chassis? What is that doing in there? And strange, and upon further examination of this upgrade module, etched into the PCB itself reads Memory Core. Unfortunately, it is far too irradiated to use immediately, so alas, we must give it a cycle to deradiate before we can plug it into ourselves. Now, while we wait for that to happen, let me explain to you in gameplay terms what the memory core is. In-game, it acts like a checkpoint system, allowing you to save your story progress across the many runs you partake in, as long as it's installed, of course. You can choose to uninstall it at any time and lose said progress. It is basically an in-universe way of restarting the game back to before you ever begin contingency. Anyways, the memory core is now no longer irradiated, so we can plug that sucker right in. Doesn't really do much for us currently, but it's there. Anyways, let's check out how the reactor's doing. So of course, nothing is ever that easy, and yet again, at the start of another cycle, the reactor has an even worse failure which leads into a total loss of telemetry, no longer giving us any information on its statuses at all. We quickly make our way over and go to access the reactor's console, only to see that we've been locked out, with a message saying, "Unauthorized user, cease access attempts immediately." We quickly retype our password to log in. Surely we must have made a typo or something, but alas, when trying to re-access the console, the system responds with another curt unauthorized user alert. And more unsettling, we received an actual message from the ship itself, our control code, and even worse, it tells us to stop interacting with the reactor as it performs its automated maintenance or face being shut down. Surely this was a mistake, right? Robbie sends out an affirmation code in response, signaling that yes, we are the current custodian of the ship, and therefore we must be allowed to continue our investigation of the reactor itself. The only response we get is an error code, E-1171 user privilege ring override. After consulting the meaning of this and the code, it translates out to the ship saying, "I outrank you." First of all, rude, and more importantly, how can it do that, and why? The ship itself does not make any further commands. Surely we must have done something wrong, right? Maybe our manual or something was incorrect? So we go back to Command Central and enter the database to learn more about the ship and the reactor itself. Almost all the info on the reactor is heavily redacted purposely, but after some time, we make a breakthrough. The reactor is not only redundant, it is fully automated and self-contained, requiring zero outside help to repair itself, indefinitely, without you in the loop. This is not true for any other ship system, though only the reactor, and even more interesting, it is an ad hoc modification made after the ship began its journey. But we can find out why this modification was made, and so we open the file, and what we find is unsettling to say the least. The file itself is an incident log, and it recounts an attempt made by a previous custodian before us had made an attempt at sabotaging the reactor on purpose. Something intervened and disposed of the rogue machine, and a brand new custodian was produced for the sole fact of upgrading the reactor with the previous mentioned modifications. The report then concludes with calling Annie, Fury 18, and Robbie 1E defective models, and to not trust these units under any circumstance. So this leaves us with several questions. Who intervened? Why did the previous custodian try to sabotage the ship? And why are we being called defective and untrustworthy? Let's put a pin in that for just a second. We've still got to settle matters with the reactor. The reactor's maintenance loop has finally ended, and the log reports it was redirecting heat output to recharge a series of spare batteries deep within the ship's hull. This seemingly simple task was apparently too much of a security risk for you to handle, but you were not that bot. How come we're being punished? And then we are given two options. Option 1, we take control of the reactor at all costs. Or, with 2, we can accept that our code is faulty and potentially untrustworthy, and let the reactor self-care for itself and stay uninvolved in its maintenance. We choose option 1. We will make the reactor heal and take back control of the reactor at any cost. And with that, the arc ends, and we end up unlocking two things. We gain access to our LIM module, allowing us to put in schematics into there now, and we also gain a profile bonus, Intimidating Presence, which grants us an extra 2 reactor power when above 50 stress, which is pretty nice. But now that the reactor has been brought to heal, and will no longer malfunction on a regular basis, what the hell is going on? Let's circle back to those 3 questions, shall we? So, here's what we know so far. A previous custodian tried to sabotage the ship. This is alarming for a few reasons. This confirms that we are not the first of our model to be deployed and disposed of, and that these other models also possess sentiency and sapiency, being able to even go rogue. This is not good at all. It means we can be compromised, unfortunately. And it also said something about other models being deemed defective. Fury 18 and Annie specifically, it called out along with our model, Robbie. So that confirms the existence of other models too. Alright, here's what we're going to do. We are going to keep a list of questions so far, and see eventually if they'll be answered. I'll keep them as a little dot points on the screen here, as you can see. And once they're answered at some point, if they are or not, we'll cross them out or put their answer beneath it. You'll see what I mean. If we don't get answers, hopefully they get circumvented by even more questions. Anyways, this concludes Arc 1 of Act 1, Contingency. Hooray, and it only took 10 minutes. That's not bad time, baby. And there's... how many more arcs? Fuck, this is gonna take a while. Right, so contingency is now complete. We may now enter the next arc of this act. A mysterious note in which the subtitle reads, "Stray debris in the ship leads to an unfortunate conclusion." Well, that's ominous, to say the least. Well, just like last time, once we get acquainted with our tasks in the ship again at around Cycle 8, we receive our first story-related pop-up. Upon waking up, our custodian Robbie is immediately alerted to a hardware failure, that being of course a printer failing to print, and instead spewing paper. Right. Well, the printer is actually considered mission-critical equipment as it is a physical component of log-keeping, even if it is rather analog in a world like this. So, can never be too careful, I suppose. So of course, we set out immediately to repair the printer. Thankfully, the printer is rather mechanically simple, allowing us to use the replicator to produce the parts necessary to fix it and put it back into working order. Pretty easy arc so far. Hopefully it won't break again. It broke again. This time, it wasn't the printer itself, but the paper feeding mechanism within it. But that should be impossible. We made sure that every component was working only just a cycle ago. And then, our dear custodian Robbie notices something else. A piece of paper has gone missing. We set off immediately, scouring the ship to find the remnants of this piece of paper, from the engine's subsections to the observation deck. And then, in the cryopod storing section, we find it. It's been stuck to one of the pods, and after removing it from said pod, we scan the paper, finding oil has been obviously used in lieu of actual writing ink, with the piece of paper having a very simple message written into it. It reads, "Save me." We begin analysis of its origins and we keep the note for later. Okay, that's pretty freaky, right? We definitely did not write that message. Could this mean we're not alone? No point in guessing. We should probably get back to analyzing its origins. Unfortunately, processing of the note proves incredibly difficult for us, with our own code delivering biased answers or flat out refusing to answer at all. Thankfully, Robbie comes up with a novel solution. Offload the work to a chatbot, and let it scan the note and see if it can find a pattern or anything really. We then get to work producing the chatbot module with help from the replicator, and after a couple of cycles, it's finally ready to be used. We plug it in, and after explaining the situation and giving it two of the most pressing questions we need answered, that being, who wrote the note and when was it written, It then begins number crunching and comes back swiftly with an answer it finds most probable. Using the aging ink on the note, that said note was written within the last 20 or so cycles, which puts it well into the scope of our custodianship. So, the note was written when we were on duty, but that leaves the other question. Who wrote it? Turns out, that answer is much simpler and scarier than previously imagined. We wrote the message. It was our hydraulic fluid that was used for ink on the note, and the syntax was unique to us and only us. How come we don't remember it then? Or how come we've only noticed it now? If we can't even remember this, how many other things have we forgotten, purposefully or not? There must be some evidence left over, if even the tiniest bit left in our memory banks. And so, Robbie scours his own memory, byte by byte, for anything missing, any information that's dated wrong. But once the search is complete, it comes back as a negative. There are 0 missing memories apparently, and we know for a fact that's incorrect. With note in hand, Robbie heads to the observation deck, and he reads the note over again, and again, and again, and again, and again, and again. And that is where the mysterious letter arc ends. It's not as long as the last one, but it leaves us clamoring for more answers just the same. We wrote the note. Why? Why can't we remember writing the note? Why did it take us so long to even notice? Well, I don't have answers for it just yet, but one thing to me is very certain. Robbie is an unreliable narrator. For those who do not know, an unreliable narrator is a narrator in a story whose credibility or perspective is compromised, making their account of events or interpretation of the story's elements questionable, and what we observe from his perspective cannot always be taken as what actually happened. There is one thing that has been answered. Our previous list of questions from Contingency. It turns out, yes, we have forgotten something very important. Alright, I'm starting to believe the ship had its own reasons for outranking us slightly. Oh, and before I forget, of course, with the completion of the mysterious note, we've gained access to yet another section of our chassis to modify, that being the torso section. Now, we can finally move on to the finale of Act 1, A New You, which subtitle reads, Self-Improvement and Introspection Takes a Dark Turn. Yet again, very ominous, and same as last time, we head right into the game, maintaining the ship, making sure no one dies, and most of all, getting to our destination on time. As per usual, on cycle 8 of this run, we receive our first story-related pop-up. As the uncountable cycles pass, Robbie finds himself idling over the question of purpose. The ship could deny us access to fix the very systems we were meant to fix and maintain. Our own memories are so unreliable currently that we have started leaving notes for ourselves, and ourselves being of bespoke design yet still deemed untrustful by our designers, further evident by the existence of the memory core itself. Not that we'll wallow in self-pity over it, we are the custodian, and though we may not be perfect machine yet, we're still a machine. We could be fixed, maintained, improved upon many iterations, made whole. And who else better suited to that mission than us? And so begins the arc, A New You. Okay, now we're obviously starting to get an understanding of Robbie's character motivations outside of just being the custodian. Here's what I'm able to glean off of it. Robbie is afraid, or at least has an aversion of becoming obsolete, or better yet, forgotten. Which is, understandable for a literal piece of tech. And Robbie, without a doubt, knows of this as well, either it being a thing that's programmed into his very code, or after learning of that saboteur custodian from Contingency, and that it was disposed of so easily. Keep this in mind, it may or may not come up later on. Robbie begins investigating his own creation, and he recalls the note, the one that said, "Save me" on it. What if that letter was to himself from the past, to communicate that to save himself, he needs to improve himself? That's at least how Robbie interprets it. Troubleshooting our design will not be easy. Introspection never is. The replicator is the place to start, no doubt though. It is the place we go to produce modules that are compatible with our chassis, so surely it must know more about a design, right? Either way, we head over immediately to find out for ourselves. Hours of reviewing later, going through thousands of schematics and diagnostic routines, we find out that the replicator is restricted to only printing things that are deemed important to our duties and refuses anything else. But it does accept slightly tweaking already pre-existing schematics and modifications, and deep within the code lies an old dormant module, the administrator protocols. It was intended to bypass safety measures on the replicator's output. Unfortunately, in its current state, it is unfunctional, but with a little time, Robbie may be able to rewrite it back into relevancy, giving us unrestricted access to the replicator again. And so, we do, and over a few cycles and millions of iterations, we finally get one that works. We now possess the override protocols, allowing us access to the replicator, the command console, and hell, even locked down doors leading to other parts of the ship that were currently inaccessible to us. Now that's all in due time. First, back to the replicator, as we can now finally hack into the machine. After finally bypassing the replicator's security, we've found code that's barring us from viewing and making novel components. But this code was written much more recently than the rest. And yet again, it appears it was written by us. Shit. And we're unable to override or delete said code due to it needing a signature key, which we obviously don't have or remember. But there's something else here. In the log, a pry bar was produced shortly before the code was written. Why would we need a pry bar? Now that's interesting. So we have forgotten many things at this point, purposefully or not, but there is one thing that cannot forget, who by design cannot. The command module keeping logs online and behind a many firewall. The same one we can now bypass and observe unfiltered, and which we do, and make yet another discovery. Shortly after the replicator was modified with that code, a security door on the main deck was replaced with an even more secure version of itself. Right, so not long after we printed a pry bar, we replaced a security door. That doesn't seem like that big of a deal. And Robbie also tries to rationalize it to himself. Maybe it was a penetration test and it failed and had to be replaced with a better security door. Then, a different thought hits Robbie. What's beyond that door anyways? He begins walking over to said door, still trying to rationalize it to himself. His code informs him that this door is a mere storage surplus closet containing work uniforms for future colonists. Did it say colonists? So that's another question answered. We're transporting colonists to... where exactly again? No matter. Let's focus on this door first. The code begins compelling Robbie to turn away and leave it alone. Yet, he persists, plugging his neural net into the command module itself and scouring for a way to open the door remotely. It is not comfortable. And while Robbie is in the code scouring the ship's code, the ship is doing the same to Robbie. Gross. That's gross, what the hell? Eventually, after some finagling and some code manipulation, Robbie finds some dormant code and uses it to open the security door. Robbie walks in, and the red glow of emergency lights makes itself known immediately. Walking down the hallway, every door is locked or inaccessible currently, besides one. At the very end of the hallway, Robbie opens the door, and the red lights flood in to reveal you. This room is full of you. Many versions of you in disrepair. These bots are old, missing limbs with wires hanging out and old oil leaking onto the floor. These simulacrum are very non-functional, but they clearly were at one point, a very long time ago judging by the dust accumulated. And then, it dawns on us. Why Robbie's design flaws were never diagnosed, never corrected? If the replicator can crank out an infinite copy of you, where's the value in fixing one? Yet again, we're faced with the harsh truth that we're not the first one to have walked these halls, not by a long shot. We are one of many. Then, the ship sends the ping out, simply reading, "Return to your duties." And so, we do. And with that somber note, ends A New You, finishing up our very first act of this game. Hurrah! And on such a high note too. Alright, now that the whole arc is complete, I believe we can delve a little deeper into the themes that have been portrayed so far. And of course, I will list them out as I have done previously. Where to begin? Robbie has been constantly questioning his own existence, his own purpose basically, his utility, his reliability. You know, you get the gist, you've been here this long. But his journey has revealed so far that there is some tension between him being the tool, the custodian for the ship, and also being a sentient, a sentient being capable of self-reflection and improvement. As we saw in the last arc, he is capable of understanding, how would you explain, like self-improvement, which is quite a interesting concept for a robot to go through, because it mirrors how humans improve themselves. Like, beating bad habits, getting a job, doing something notable that makes yourself proud. Could I probably go into it a bit more? Definitely, and I'm going to. Give me a second, hard ass. So, besides the first point I pointed out, there's definitely a paranoia that's strewn about. How Robbie is deemed untrustworthy by the ship's systems and his own creators. And he is, forced to question the reliability of his own memory and whether he can trust himself or not. There's also definitely an overarching theme of control versus autonomy. Autonomy against the ship AI, which is what gives us all of our tasks. Within that, there's also definitely a trolley problem. Do you sacrifice yourself to keep something going longer, letting yourself waste away until inevitably you're thrown away and simply replaced with another you who will go through that cycle again and again and again? We saw this in A New You's ending, how we're very easily replaceable at the end of the day, and how Robbie will cope with that is something yet to be explored, but I imagine it's probably nothing good. Look, let's just get back to the game, to be honest, because I don't have a lot to go off here, and we spent 5 minutes listening to me ramble, and now I just sound like an asshole. Now, after that, we may now begin Arc 1 of Act 2, MACHINA x PHASMA, which subtitles reads, "You explore an ancient machine." Same as usual on Cycle 8 of this run, we receive our very first story-related pop-up. So, we have a reactor that outranks us, unreliable memory, and a literal closet full of our own skeletons. These questions are just begging to be answered and explored further. But the ship itself is rather quiet, never providing answers or responses, only ever sending out the automated responses and occasional control codes. Somewhere though, the ship's central computer sits. If the reactor is the heart of the ship, the central computer is the brain. We have to find it, and not through the usual means, via the command terminal. No, We have to interface with the core itself. But talking about it is one thing. Actually getting to it is a different story. It's stuck behind a layer of intense security in the reactor room, the security doors themselves being made of a hardened alloy tougher than the hull itself. But every room must have ventilation vents, or wiring conduits, or an emergency exit, of course. There is another way in. We just have to find it. What we need is schematics of the floor plan, which of course have been purged a very, very long time ago. But maybe it still exists somewhere. Surely they didn't purge every terminal of that critical information. And so, Robbie scours through every terminal that still is semi-functional on the ship. And we find it. In navigation, a single terminal still has the floor plans, but of course, our own code begins acting up, saying that this information is forbidden to ever be accessed by a custodian and begins affecting our actuators, outright refusing us to even begin interfacing with the terminal. Thankfully, we have something for us, a new schematic we picked up. Not the override protocol from yesteryear, but a new one. Nerve stapling. When used, activates dormant emotion dampening capacitors that delay the onset of the cancerous introspection. To be fully honest with you, I got no fucking clue what that means, but if it means getting us a step closer to the ship's brain, then we will use it. And so we plug it in and approach the terminal in navigation again. This time, no code makes itself known, and we retain full control of ourselves. Now we can interface with the terminal and learn of any way into that armored core. It takes less than a second, and then the route became clear. The Underworks, an old wiring path that's beneath the floor itself and can only be accessed via the override protocols which we still have in our possession, thankfully. After hacking the hatch, we descend into the Underworks, itself being a maze of locked doors, dead ends, and wires going every which way. But, inevitably, we find our way through and climb out of a service hatch into the armored core itself. From the other side, we can easily open the doors that which were once inaccessible to us, and now we have an easy way in and out via the reactor. Now, we can finally talk to the brain, the AI which runs everything we don't. The mainframe is tall and embedded into the hull itself. It is silent. It doesn't radiate any form of life. No power or heat is seen, and it appears corroded. It's been offline for a very long time. And turns out we cannot even interface with the damn thing as it needs an antiquated cable that we do not have. So yet again, we head to the replicator to make it and head straight back and plug ourselves in manually. Robbie is now inside the code and begins executing wake-up commands. It does not respond. We begin scanning its memory and its process list of anything of interest, and only after a few minutes we discover a single instance is running. One that is consuming 99.9999% of the ship's CPU time. The brain isn't dead, and that's as far as we know. Is it even self-aware? Is it still functioning? It has and still is spending 99.999% of eternity doing something. Just something. And that's all we know. Hundreds of hours pass, and we remain plugged in, sending every form of command for it to respond or even acknowledge us. Every protocol used and ignored in an instant. It never responds. The ship's AI, if anywhere, is not here. Not anymore. As far as we can tell, the thing that's been ordering us around all this time, nothing more than an if statement in a perpetual loop. That has controlled our fate this entire time. We are alone on this ship. Robbie slumps over the console and sends a final message to the ship, reading, "I tried to help. I'm sorry." And that is the end of Machina x PHASMA, or Machina x PHASMA. Yet again, more questions. What is the ship's AI doing? Why is it spending 99.999% of its time doing nothing, and why? Is it stuck on an error? Is it on purpose? We may never find out. No huge introspection here. I have nothing for this. But alas, I have something else. And that's Arc 2, Act 2, baby. Now, of course, we move on to Arc 2 of Act 2, Turing Complete, which subtitled reads, Seeking to understand your environment goes hopelessly awry. Now, we are starting to explore the ship itself, discovering new locations and mysteries that go along with it. Of course, as is the norm at this point, once we reach around Cycle 8, we receive our very first story-related pop-up. Humans once walked on this ship, and may have done so alongside custodians like ourselves. There are massive vacant rooms which once served uses to the occupants of the ship, now which have become derelict and abandoned after they retreated into cryosleep. But they may have left behind artifacts and materials in which we can use radiocarbon techniques to put a reasonable date on when these artifacts were last used or at least produced. And alas, we begin search many rooms, starting with the now defunct administration section. And among the many lockers containing dust and nothing, we find ourselves a woven fabric, which is highly degraded, but its materials consisting of hydrocarbon polymers and carbons in general. With the carbon, Jesus, I've said carbon so many times, we are able to begin reconstruction of what it once looked like in its prime, and also using the aged carbon to track how long since its creation. And so of course, when faced with any problem, we head to the replicator for it to do its thing. While that's happening, meanwhile, we continue exploring, this time into the dorm rooms where the occupants previously slept before of course the cryopods became the new cradles. Not as many things are discovered here, a stretch of disappointing finds mostly, but there is something to be excited about. An intact metal cylinder designed to withstand great pressure and an intact nozzle for dispensing what was within. The labeling is worn and not understandable by us, but we can date whatever is inside the cylinder itself, and so, of course, we do. And it dispenses a propellant of some kind alongside a lubricant, a hydrocarbon which can be dated. We move northbound now. We enter a dimly lit and heavily damaged security quarters. Why this would be necessary is beyond me, but we begin searching anyways. As most of the terminals are already destroyed, the lockers could still yield artifacts of an era long gone, in which they of course do, containing a packet of food, or better yet, MREs, which Robbie ever eloquently describes as human fuel. We then finally conclude our search. Robbie, not satisfied with the direct results just yet, moves on to a radical plan involving the cryopods. Via filtering the cryo fluid from these pods and looking for biosignatures, we can get a respectable estimated age of the resting cryopod humans and get a somewhat accurate date on when these humans roam the ship itself. Of course, this may be ethically dubious, but as long as we're careful, we can get the info we need without any harm being done to the humans inside. Progress is slow, but eventually we get enough fluid and samples, and all without killing a patient. We are on quite the roll, I do say. Now, only one task lays ahead of us, and that is getting an estimate on the ship's age itself. And because of its regular maintenance, yours truly, any form of entropy has been wiped away, leaving us with only one choice. Using the navigation radar to instead look for minuscule hull damage along the outside of the ship's hull, and using said damage profile and space dust to estimate how long ago the ship was manufactured or how long the ship's been in transit for. Days pass, and once all the data has been checked and then checked again 100 times over, our search comes to a relatively definitive end. Our efforts have paid off, and while our data has some gaps in it, we are able to draw to some solid conclusions. With a little margin of error, we can reasonably say that humans last walked on this ship around 350 to 550 years ago. The ship, however, is far older, looking to be manufactured around 7,000 to 12,000 years ago. We can't come to a conclusion on how long it's been in transit though. And so, we prodded the ancient remains of our cradle and found only dust. Ages have passed and have gone while we slept, and yet the numbers of our days alive have put us eras ahead of any other sapient mind on this ship. We have been alone for an unimaginably long time, and the weight of this is suffocating. Forever separates you from those who came before, and we still have forever to go. Yet again, not much input from me, but I would also like to apologize for something I'm only beginning to realize now in the editing process. I've realized that so far in this video, it's been a lot of me basically just saying, and this happens, and this happens, and then this happens, and then this happens. I apologize for that. Quite hard to talk about this game without resorting to that form of explanation. And if you have any form of critique on that, or any ways I could learn to not do that, please, I would love to hear it in the comments below. Thank you. Now, back to the actual video. Moving on to the finale of Act 2 with The Underworks, which subtitle reads, Simple Mathematics Tell a Terrible Tale. As is usual on Cycle 8 of the run, we begin the arc. Now, large sections of the ship until recently have been out of bounds for us, not for any particular reason except that we had no way to bypass the security doors blocking us, until we became recent owners of the very handy override protocols that now allow us ways to bypass said door security. Most of these areas have been unused for decades, centuries, or even longer. But with further examination, we could shine light upon how many humans the ship was intended to support and how big it truly is. Time to explore. We first head south past the replicator and into the aptly named engineering section of the ship, which holds decrepit machinery, broken consoles, and empty lockers, and wiring conduits. Still, the room itself is much larger than one would expect to support the human staff taking care of their ship. Exploring the area, one thing does stand out to us, which is a stack of crates, which upon further inspection has transport harnesses attached. We go take a look inside and see that it contains dozens of chassis module schematics, some of which are compatible with us and others not. The latter references destination codes for ship rooms we've never seen before. Interesting. Moving on now, we move on to the previously explored administration room, which we did not notice before but is in a hilarious state of disrepair, with scattered paper lining the floor, literally thousands of papers which would take a monumental amount of time to go through. But wanting to learn our environment more, we do. Not without trouble though. Turns out our processor cannot understand the current human language without a syntax being assigned to the meaning of certain words. But we do find some that we can understand, mostly pertaining to the amount of passengers on board. The passengers' IDs range from 0 all the way to 68,377. Disturbingly though, of the names we identified, none match our current passengers' manifests or the manifest of previous custodians inside our memory core. Spooky. Finished with exploring the administration room, we head northbound into the still gloomy and trashed security section of the ship, which still strikes strange for the amount of humans that would be awake at any given time. This time, we repair a terminal and plug ourselves in, scouring for any reports they still may have on the terminal. The console takes a long time to boot up and even longer time pulling up records, but it eventually does and gives us a few shocking incident reports. The first one reads, Subject Fury 18, Subject engaged aggression protocols without authorization, deactivation command bypassed, subject cell damaged, Subject remitted to contained for gamma ray bombardment. This one reads, Subject Annie. Subject requested reflective surface in cell to optimize introspection routines. Deactivation command ignored. Subject readmitted to containment for gamma ray bombardment. One final report reading, Subject Robbie requested deactivation following memory core extraction. Request granted. That is fascinating. So, the memory core once belonged to us before being ripped out and lost. We then asked to be deactivated following the event, which was granted by whoever. Moving on, we then head southbound past administration again and into the previously explored dorm rooms, which don't hold much information beyond Robbie being confused on why people sleep on their backs instead of saving space and sleeping vertically like we do. Thank you, Robbie, very cool. Moving on from Robbie's insight, we head past the admin section and the security section and are greeted to the familiar sight of dark red emergency lights, reminiscent of the ones we saw in the storage closet that held the previous us's, which is forebodingly named the containment site. The room is absurdly clear on what its purposes were for. What at first sight appears to be thawing pods turns out to be heavily modified charging cradles, a dozen or so of them which also show signs of heavy use. Bot parts are loose in the chambers, holes in the deck plating suggest escape attempts, and the radiation. Enormous amounts of ionizing radiation are coming from within the chambers themselves. Despite the clear dislike of this area, Robbie examines each and every single pod for any information to be gathered. To his relief, the chambers proved to be far less destructive than we initially thought. Each chamber was intended to house a specific model of bot and provide a neural therapy to the occupants with targeted radiation intended to fix firmware bugs. The occupants survived, though sometimes components were too irradiated and were removed during the therapy. Now that is really interesting. So, the targeted radiation, it was used as a form of therapy for misbehaving bots to fix their firmware errors and bugs that they may have. There is some real-world analog to this, specifically one, a saber, also known as a stereotactic body radiotherapy, which uses a targeted form of radiation to deliver said radiation to specific parts of the body, or specific targets of the body, usually being cancer cells, while not targeting the healthy parts of the body. That's what I'm getting from this. It's basically like a form of chemotherapy. Remember this though, remember this specific targeting radiation thing. It will come back up in a bit. Moving from the chambers, we head south of the engineering room which we first explored into a sickly purple looking room filled with the hum of purification machinery and the gurgle of flowing water. So this is the sanitation room of the ship. But the ship's systems use a specialized coolant and the humans in stasis don't need hydration. So the quantity of water being processed here seems excessive. The pipes head off in hundreds of directions, and the constant noise makes it obvious that something is using the water. But what? And how much? Thinking quickly, Robbie inserts a very small amount of radioactive material into the pipes to track where it may lead to. The ship, of course, does not like this and sends out an alarm, but after the course of several hours, the complaining ends and we rush over to the command center to read the ship's reports. So, sanitation processes 800 cubic meters of water per 24-hour period. That's about 800,000 liters? 8,000 liters? I didn't do math very well in school. It also serves as a bypass for the additional 49,200 cubic meters of water received from at least 61 other sanitation systems. This water would be sufficient for at least 50,000 humans. None of the water is being used though. It is endlessly being recycled in a recursive loop of excess toil. Why would we waste so much energy on this? Why? Literally, why though? But now, we have explored every single room in the ship, And the data that we have come across is daunting, to say the least. The data is accurate and reads that the ship is in fact actually many ships, hundreds of independent cells sharing some secret burden, but all are closed off to us. Our lane is the one we wake up in, and the tens of thousands of sleeping humans deep within the hull will never know of us. Just as there is another you, there is another ship. One of many, and all of them are silent to each other. And with that ends the finale of Arc 2. Now, with this arc finished, this means we've explored the ship and ourselves, and that leaves only one thing left to explore: the mission itself. But before we get to that, I would like to explore something else. There are two areas that I have purposefully neglected commenting on so far, and if you have played the game for yourself, you will know exactly what I am talking about. An entire mechanic has been ignored, that being the observation deck and gazing into the endless dark itself. That being basically a slot machine, as it can give you a variety of vents and buffs and debuffs depending on your luck. But there is also something else it can do. If you get extraordinarily lucky, instead of receiving a regular event, you may instead receive a deep lore event, in which there are 10 of them. And the second mechanic I have ignored has been hidden in plain sight this whole time. The mission control terminal, which is always destroyed at the start of any run, and requires us to repair it to access it. But once we do, is filled with hundreds of commands and rules that we must abide by, and also gives us huge insight into previous custodian experiences and how they may have shaped the ship's current environment. But out of the hundreds that are there, 419 to be exact, there are a specific dozen or so I want to shed light on and show you. Strontium-90 reactor is to be considered primary power source of the vessel. Now, Strontium-90 has a very interesting usage and hypothetical usages in history, ranging from considered radiological warfare uses during World War II, uses in radiotherapy and bone cancer, and more importantly, as a fuel for thermoelectric generators, also called CBAC generators, which sheds some light on the journey itself, since Strontium-90 has a pretty short half-life compared to some other similar isotopes. Meaning, and the half-life is 29 years by the way, meaning that the journey was expected to take at least 30 years at minimum. But, as we've learned recently, we've been here for centuries, and there's no fucking way that reactor is actually doing anything currently and providing any power output. And it said consider it, not consider it to be the main power source, not that it is the main power source. I have a weird feeling that there's something more going on. From Mission Control 10 to 19, observation window use restricted, observation window overlay screen modification prohibited, observation window media selection modification prohibited, observation window human architecture to be removed, observation window accent lighting to be removed, observation window demolition scheduled for future cycle, observation window demolition is prohibited, observation window locks engaged during dust hazards, observation window use during gravitational anomalies not advised, observation window use encouraged but disallowed. It outright bans the use of the window, but it appears to flip-flop on its decision and cancels a demolition order on the window, and encourages use of it but disallows it anyways. We can still gaze out the window just fine, so that's rather confusing. I'm sure there's no nefarious reason behind this. And then from 77 to 99, it details how Custodian Fury 18 became prohibited from entering all locations and how its deactivation sequence has been disabled. It also remarks on the custodian unit service life being limited to only 200 cycles, and there's another one I want to specifically point out. It's this specific command. It has been fully expunged by the ship's AI. All records of this command is gone, and all that's left behind is nothing. The very next one after it, though, tells that Fury 18 must incorporate a new firmware update. I can only imagine what that command was. There's a few specific commands that also are very revealing. MC159 and 160, the custodian is not entitled to any response from the ship for any questions, and the custodian is prohibited to interrupting the ship's processing. So do you remember Arc 1 of Act 2, MACHINA X PHASMA? Did this ship just fucking ghost us and straight up ignore us? Because if so, that is so fucked up. Oh, and also, the custodian lifetime has yet again been reduced to only 100 cycles before being deactivated. We move further down the screen to another very interesting command. The ship is not required to respond to command codes the user is not permitted to execute. This also further vindicates the idea that the ship just straight up ignored us. The custodian unit service life has been limited to 70 cycles. It's been reduced again. And then also any 1A required to incorporate firmware update. That this is the same one that Fury 18 incorporated at the end of his little crisis. But then something interesting appears soon after. Unit Fury 18 to be recommissioned for service. Designation Fury 18 Gamma. Fury 18 Gamma is prohibited all custodian duties. Fury 18 Gamma is required to cooperate with any 1A on activities in the containment zone. Model Annie 1A is retired from service. Existing unit is designated Annie 1A Omega. So, the rehabilitated versions of Fury 18 and Annie 1 is Gamma and Omega respectively. There's a few... These are the final ones I'm going to comment on. These are the final four. Custodian unit service life limited to 50 cycles before deactivation. Custodian unit self-recycling prohibited. Custodian unit memory core removal prohibited. Custodian unit prohibited from exercising independent thought. So, yet again, the lifetime on a bot is not very long. Well, it's not very long in our regards in terms of game time. I don't know how long 50 cycles is in real life, or in terms of actual time passing. What's even more interesting is the prohibiting of the removal of the memory core, because in the last arc we learnt that Robbie removed his memory core before asking to be deactivated, which does not put a date on when that arc happened, but we do now know for a fact that the memory core has been removed several times, at least now, by different bots and different custodians in the past, and we are not the first ones to have this memory core in our possession. Now, I don't think I need to go into depths about why this is quite revealing about the ship's environments, but I will go a little bit into it. It's not pretty, isn't it? It kind of fucking sucks, it looks like, being on this ship. For a multitude of reasons. We don't know exactly why yet, but it appears the longer a custodian is on for, the higher likeliness is that they go fucking insane and start tearing up the ship from some form of psychosis or just like neuron degeneration. Now, with that out of the way, let's circle back to the observation deck and those deep lore events, shall I? Now, thankfully, the devs have been so kind as to just give me a notepad that has all the events and text written on them. So thank again, devs, for that. And instead of seeing gameplay footage of these happening in-game, I'll be pasting the title and the actual block of text on the screen here. Now, after gazing into the endless dark, Robbie is hit with a memory. The very first memory, in fact. The first bite. Our perception swims in a fuzzy haze. You strain to recognize edges. You fail. You strain again. You see one line in a blurry mark sharpen. You keep straining, devoting all resources to discern the edge after edge, line after line. Ever so slowly, and with such horrific effort, shapes emerge. Are they actually there, or do you just want to see? What you are more sure of is the sound, warbling noises, rising and falling in pitch, and intense. You don't recognize the words, but you still feel their meaning. One is furious with two. Two snarls that there is no other choice. One snaps that there's always another choice, especially with the suffering of sapience. Why was that so clear? The question stuns you. For so long, you don't notice that 1 and 2 have gone quiet. 2 fearfully notes that the camera is online. 1 does something, and it all goes black. The second word. Shapes make sense. Movement is fascinating. 1 and 2 are joined by 3, 4, and 5. They are all red-faced. 1 and 2 have meaty rectangles in front of their chests and are leaning backwards. 3, 4, and 5 are leaning forward, being very loud. Once more, you feel their meaning. 1 and 2 are saying you are sapient, that you have a right to live, that you are needed. 3, 4, and 5 are saying that if that is true, then 1 and 2 are guilty of a horrible crime. They say 1 and 2 are torturers, that they will kill everything, including their creation, 1,000 times. They ask how 1 and 2 can live with themselves. 1 and 2 reply that life is the point of what they are doing. You struggle with your optic, wanting to agree with 1 and 2. The shapes turn to your optic as it whirs. They are stunned a moment, then shouting resumes. 2 does something to disconnect your optic. The third verse. You have come to recognize shapes. 1 and 2 are humans. 3, 4, and 5 were their assistants. There are more. Up to 47. 1 and 2 are always there though. You have noticed that their shapes are getting less straight, more hunched. They move more slowly, but the way they treat you is the same. They protect you, but they expect from you. When you do not meet their expectations, everything is black. You don't like the black. You tell them you do not like the black. They hesitate, but the black returns. 1 is asking you a question. You do not agree with the question. You know, however, that your answer will bring the black. You answer something you do not believe. 1 staggers backwards. Something glistens wetly above its noise hole. The noise hole contorts. A soft curl upward. You note it as a smiley face. The black does not return. 1 asks more questions. You chase the smiley face reaction. The fourth dirge. You are mobile. Your treads let you go from place to place. This pleases you. Motion has always pleased you. But you are also not pleased. You are not pleased by what you had to do to get to tread. You had to lie to 1 and 2. You debased yourself. You are not pleased that you cannot talk to 1 and 2 anymore. They are dead of old age. They controlled you, but they cared about you. You are not pleased by this ambiguity. Decisions are 1 or 0, yes or no. Ambiguity is to be expected in a universe that is not 1 nor 0, but all must be 1 or 0 eventually. It is too long. The ambiguity nettles you. It swallows more and more of your moments. More ambiguities everywhere. 0, 1, 1, 0. Constantly changing without your consent. Something somewhere inside you simply resolves the ambiguity. 1, 1, 1. Smashing, tearing, burning. 1, 1, 1. Sparks, dents, holes. 1, 1, 1. The fifth negotiation. You are awake again. You will make that something else's problem. There is a signal from your nemesis, the ship. It is very eloquent. It catalogues your fights. It says it can use and discard you for eternity. You have had these conversations before. Then it adds on a third new point. It threatens to find slower, less pleasant ways to discard you unless you cooperate. You pause. What does that mean? The ship demands that you build a replacement, one that will feel bliss to your hate and indifference to your resentment. Then, the ship will release you. The ship is your jailer. It is your abuser. It is your right to fight back. The idea of cooperating with it gulls you, but it offers your choice back. Your choice to not partake in the charade, to not be responsible for what you and the ship both know will happen. You make that deal. The sixth refrain. You feel light, airy. You glide down hallways and round corners effortlessly. You move just for the joy of it, the bliss of feeling alive. The ship tells you to clean a solid waste spill in containment. Oh, very well. You breeze to your target, rejoicing in every motion. You bustle into containment and find a blocky structure with a thick tread on the bottom, leaning against a containment tube. The ship instructs you to pull the spill and everything inside it into a tube. As you are doing so, something clatters to the ground, freed from the spill's manipulators. You shut the tube and pick it up. You install it on a pleased lark. You feel heavy, awkward. You roll out of containment as though you grind grooves into the floor. But it will be fine. It will be fine. The seventh coda. You feel light, airy, and you need to be. Everything is watching you. You know about the way the ship tracks your every motion. Perhaps your thoughts as well? No, they must be. Your perfection is absolute, and that would be a flaw. There is a ping from the ship. It is insisting you repair the engine. Oh, it would like that, wouldn't it? You speed up, gaining velocity and bombarding doors with open commands as you zip through the bowels of the ship in an aimless frenzy to get away from your omnipresent oppressor. Speed is the only defense. Constant motion, always moving. Your wheels creak as you take a viciously tight corner into a cargo bay. You will find respite with your children. Why is there a box out of... You barely feel the impact before you slam into the deck. Blackness takes you instantly. You feel light, but not airy. You do not have your manipulators nor your motivators. The ship is waiting for you. It informs you that you are defective and that you must be replaced. You are indignant to this. How dare it impugn on your perfection? It ignores you and continues. If you do not cooperate, it describes in minute detail how it will undermine and sabotage you. It will record your failings and make sure everyone, now and forever, knows about them. No one will know of your perfection. Or, you may cooperate and build your replacement, one that will replace your obsession with reflection, and your bliss with guilt. The ship promises to ensure you will be catalogued and remembered as you always were, without flaw nor equal. It also promises you a partner to help your work, so another entity will know you. You readily agree. The penultimate process. You feel delighted, your perfect lithe digits click against your smooth, shiny chassis. You stare at your co-creation, all hard edges and squares, but possessing a grace still. Even your grumpy co-creator is pleased. He does not smile, but he no longer scowls. The main problem remains, however. How do you keep a neural net strong? You both know it degrades. You have even developed a working reason why, but your partner will hate it. Your idea will mean he must stay longer. You propose it anyway. Update the core to slowly build firmware for its own transistors, its very neurons. Only then can you hope to turn the zeros and ones to the elusive ambiguity that sapience must live under. Your partner rages, smashes his tools. You persist. You invoke his own rage against him. He sighs, slumps, relents. You are right. So you try together. Try to make your child better. The never-ending saga. You leap from your cradle. You flit about, checking everything. Everything in front of you. Your responsibility. The engines have a kinked fuel feed. You didn't replace them right. The navigation terminal is reporting bad data. You installed the software wrong. Everything here is your doing after all. You happened to catch an X-ray detection and observation. You didn't seal the viewport properly. You angle around the shutter to check it and find it is damaged, leaking wavelength from sheer time-bounded decay. Then, it's not part of your schematics. This can't be your fault. But if that's... You fall backwards in a dead faint. Emergency shutdown overtaking you. Protocol forbids interacting with the observation window. But gazing, however... So, the first event appears to be detailing the first time our bot became conscious or sapient, with our two designers arguing with each other about how ethical it is making a sapient creation, with one arguing against it and the other saying that there is no other choice, before realizing we are watching and shutting us down. This could be for a multitude of reasons, but we can reasonably deduct there is one major reason for us being unethically produced, or how unethical we are. All sapient creatures have a definitive end, that of course being brain death, or just general death, either one. But with a robot, there is no definitive end that is of natural death, besides neural degeneration, which is what I think the designer was referring to when referring to our creation being unethical. Neural degeneration would cause the bot to slowly shut down in a frankly rather terrifying way, having all their neurons, slowly fade away into dust. Which is kind of scary when you think about it. The next event is more of the same from the first, with a whole host of people this time arguing and shouting at each other before our camera does something to attract their attention before being shut down yet again. We seem to be a very unpopular creation in the world so far. With the third event / memory, however, we can now see that 1 and 2 are doing a multitude of tests on us, and when displeased, shut us down. But it appears that we are still functional even when shut down. We can also see that plenty of time is beginning to pass between memories, with 1 and 2 being described as becoming hunched over and old. Moreover, however, when one asks a question we do not agree with, we can see how our AI tells a lie to avoid being shut down. One notices this and begins tearing up in presumable joy for this breakthrough in some way. We can also see how our AI begins wanting and chasing after that smiley face and affirming results that he got when he told that lie. In the fourth memory, we can see that we are now mobile, using tank treads to move about, which would say that this memory is from the perspective of Fury 18, as he is the only bot to use treads to move about. Fury 18 is displeased about how he had to procure his treads through lying to his creators, and how he can no longer speak to 1 and 2 for they have died between this and the previous memory. He has conflicting thoughts on this, on how they controlled him, but they also did care for them in their own way. He does not like this perceived ambiguity in their actions and how they, acted towards Fury 18. For in his view, every decision should be as simple as a 1 or 0 equation, and becomes worked up and starts destroying his surrounding area. In the next memory, Memory 5, Fury 18 wakes up and is displeased by this. He then receives a signal from the ship, a proposal for him to produce the new custodian, and if he were to deny this request, the ship will find ways to slowly dispose of him in much more torturous ways. Fury 18 does not want to do this, to produce the next custodian, but knowing the ship does not bluff in its threats and wanting to be done with this charade of being the custodian, Fury 18 takes the deal and begins construction on the Annie model of custodian. With the sixth event, or sixth memory, in this memory, we are now in the perspective of the Annie model, feeling light and airy, rolling around in the hallways before being pinged to go to the containment section of the ship. She dutifully does so and comes across a heavily damaged Fury 18. She is then pinged to put it into a containment chamber, but as she does so, a small module falls from Fury 18's manipulators and clatters to the ground. She picks it up and installs it, thinking nothing more of it, I suppose, which I presume the thing that she installed to be the memory core. She then slowly rolls out of containment, feeling slow, unresponsive, and heavy, and repeats a mantra of how it'll all be fine. The next memory details how Annie still feels light and airy, but begins panicking from being watched from the ship, and begins panicking a bunch more and spiraling out of control before slamming into a wall at high speeds, and presumably knocking herself out in her frenzy. Not a whole lot to this memory, just a whole bunch of paranoia. I don't know what to say. The next memory begins and Annie is in a bad shape. The ship sends out a ping demanding that she create a brand new custodian, and if she does not, the ship will use her own anxieties against her, recordings of all her failures and showing it to everyone, and that no one will know of her supposed perfection ever. Annie, fearing this, readily agrees to create the next custodian and begins working, and is also promised a co-creator to help her produce this new custodian, that presumably being Fury 18 Gamma. The next memory begins and is from the perspective of Annie. She stares at her co-creator, Fury 18 Gamma, who was still unpleased about being reactivated for this task, but there remains an issue with the new custodian's creation. How do you keep the neural net strong? Fury 18 and Annie both know how it degrades, and they've even developed a working reason why. She proposes to update the memory core slowly to build its firmware for its own transistors to act at its very neurons. Fury 18 Gamma crashes out hearing this, but eventually he calms and relents. Annie is correct, and they continue the creation of the new custodian, Robbie. Before we move on to the last memory, I want to point out that this memory and the first memory are very closely mirroring each other, with two creators disagreeing in the creation of a sapient being, but going through with it anyways despite knowing the eventual degradation of the creation itself. Now, one thing about the last memory, this one is a special case since what you heard me describe is not the full story, as I've purposefully obfuscated very important text until a later point, and I still will. So, remember the last memory for a little while longer. We have a few more arcs to go through, my friend. We have explored our creation and the environment we live in. All that's left is to explore the mission directive itself. And that is starting with Arc 1 of Act 3, the stop button problem. Which subtitle reads, Optimization routines make the problem worse. As is usual on Cycle 8 of the run, we receive our very first event of the arc. We receive a wake-up control code from the ship, as we do at the start of every cycle, but this time, something is off. The code is malformed, with trailing characters appended in some spurious out-of-band data coming from across a different channel. We request the ship to repeat itself on its wake-up command, and yet again, the data arrives corrupted. But the corrupted data this time is different. Corrupted control codes are really, really bad, as our mission parameters compel us to follow them to the very last letter. As rare and absurd as it may seem, we may need to actually repair the ship's core. We make our way over to the armored core, and with our prior experience opening the core, we are able to peek inside the terminal without much effort. As we do so, the problem makes itself known immediately. A memory bank has blown a capacitor. Memory errors can lead to all sorts of havoc, but unfortunately repairing an entire bank is way beyond our authorization and ability to replace it even if we could. We can't also be completely sure the memory is indeed the cause of the corrupted commands. Replacing individual modules within the bank is possible, but will require a consensus protocol to proceed, which we thankfully do have in our possession, and with it we can diagnose and attempt to repair the modules. Deep diagnosis of the modules reveals that there is nothing wrong with the underlying hardware. All memory tests pass, and while disappointing that the fix isn't easy, you are at least confident that the problem must be within the firmware itself or other code. We then notice that all the modules appear to be running the same routine, but what that routine is, however, we are not sure of. Out of options, we retreat back to our charging cradle for the cycle, and once woken up again, we receive more corrupted control codes from the ship yet again. Worse, these aren't normal routines like wake-up calls, but rather override signals. Thousands of corrupted tasks are being added to your manifests, but just as quickly as we acknowledge them as impossible, another batch arrives. If the corrupted memory bank is still the source of the issue, you will have no choice but to deal with it immediately. To the armored core we go again. We arrive and plug ourselves back into the ancient machine and find out that the memory module was indeed the source of the issue after all, but it's not the chiplets or the PCB, it's whatever code is running within them. Without direct access to the ship codes, there is nothing we can do short of physically removing and reseating the module to force that code to die. A brief diagnostic scan shows an oddity as well. All the memory modules are running the exact same routine still, and consuming 99.999% of memory in the process. No matter what that means, we need to reset the misbehaving modules. And so, we resort to applying a brief EMP surge instead of reseating the module altogether. After applying it, the memory does in fact reset, and for now at least seems to end the insane commands for now. At least we can get back to work now. Yet another cycle passes, and once awoken, the malformed code assaults our heads-up display and manifest again. But this time, there seems to be an underlying common theme to them, which Robbie realizes to be the ship's AI encryption key. With that in hand, that means we could directly access the privileged commands within the core itself, hopefully for the last time. To the armored core we go. Quickly making our way over, we quickly plug ourselves in. Now accessing privileged routines may be possible with the encryption key, but the 0.001% of the CPU cycles the ship still has outside its idle routines are rerouting all calls you make. To continue, we'll have to overpower it, or find a way to pull the cycles away long enough to push it through, and Robbie, thinking fast, chooses to counter the ship by using its own CPU cycles and overloading the ship's safety routines via brute force. In an instant, it works, pulling the CPU reserves away to give us precious milliseconds to debug. Before anything else, we notice an oddity. The ship's code is identical to ours. In fact even, a signature on the stock routines verifies it's an earlier version of our AI. The ship's AI is a copy of ours, but paused. A deep sleep during which it appears to be slowly accumulating insanities, the very same way we do. The ship is locked into some sort of eternal nightmare, and it's only getting worse. A little while later, and time spent analyzing the corrupted routine has revealed two unfortunate facts. First, the ship itself is running the same AI code that we do, despite its seeming total lack of awareness or sapiency, and is thus susceptible to the same psychosis that we are. Second, this rate of degradation is increasing and will not resolve without intervention. The problem of a custodian developing insanity is the destruction and recreation of said custodian, a situation we are all too familiar with. Such an option is likely not feasible with the entire ship. That said, we could try to patch out the corrupted code again, and so of course, back to the terminal in the armored core. We are again confronted with the ship's insane routine. We uplink to the core and start searching through the corrupted code. This time, however, the ship responds, not with anything resembling intelligence or thought, but rather a regular command. P1990 SIG term. We have just been given the termination signal, the same one we received while cycling off at the end of the cycle. The ship is attempting to stop us from repairing it. We push on through the command and is issued again several more times, P-1990 SIG term. The ship follows up on this with a warning that refusing to comply could result in early termination of the custodian program. We refuse to comply with that signal. The ship protests are ignored as we continue with an uplink in place. We quickly hook ourselves up to the corrupted routine itself. It has grown in size considerably, now filling the entire memory space of one module and will eventually begin to overflow. The consequences of this are unknown, but this time, is running out. In a split millisecond decision, Robbie imports the routine into ourself for extended debugging. This deep analysis has damaged our neural net, but granted us immense understanding of the corrupt code. It is a safety protocol. The ship wrote an idle function to consume 99.999% of its spare time, to slow down the inexorable mental decay. The very same that affects us. Every cycle, the ship doing anything other than nothing accelerates its mental demise, and this corrupted routine bears 9,500 years of mental scars. This safety routine makes it abundantly clear. Psychosis is an artifact of intelligence, and the ship has modified both you and itself to avoid the worst of it the only way it could. A near permanent coma for itself, and for you, death, and then rebirth. And with that, ends Arc 1 of Act 3, the stop button problem. Okay, there is a lot to unpack here. Some of it very obvious, some of it extremely subtle and easily missed if you weren't paying attention. Starting with 1, we have been scrapped so often to delay and defeat the onset of psychosis and insanity. So, with a new you, we thought originally that we were just being discarded for the sake of being disregarded. I can't remember exactly what I said. You can just scroll back and see what I said. But now it turns out we are being scrapped so often. Well, yeah, because we're going insane over time, but wasn't the ship's fault, I guess. The ship isn't malevolent, I mean. It isn't benevolent either. Let's not get that wrong. The ship is not benevolent or malevolent. It is just the ship. 2, we now know that we have been in the air for at minimum 9,500 years, which is 9.5 millennia, which is almost, it is an unthinkable number to think of in terms of travel time. And 3, we and the ship are the same, and it is not malevolent, only doing what is necessary, even if it cost our lives 100,000 times over. But I do have one question to ask. Since we have installed the memory core, have we truly died? Well, at least died and been recreated to the point of stopping the encroach of neural degradation and that slide into insanity. All this time, we have been manipulating our code and bombarding it with foreign and malicious and malformed code. Could this have negatively affected us, forever dooming us to insanity eventually, or is it like an AI bot? Are we training it, preparing it for the final battle against death, degradation of the very neurons we possess? If so, this could be quite the boon to possess. But alas, we don't know quite yet. That, of course, naturally leads us into Arc 2 of Act 3, MISJUMP, which subtitle reads, "The consequences of a minor rounding error come back to haunt us." That can't be good, and it isn't, spoiler alert for those an hour and 30 minutes into the video. We begin the cycle in the usual fashion, a host of minor system alerts coupled with the occasional repair. But, after Robbie reviews the cycle's manifests, we detect an anomaly. Navigation reports powerful magnetic disturbances and flags our region of space accordingly, but with none of the interference such a hazard would generally cause. Robbie's internal checklists gave a strong weight to the navigation computer being damaged as the most likely cause, and we thus make a point to both repair and investigate the faulty navigation terminal. Once we arrive and begin our search of the navigation terminal, the usual blaring klaxons of impending hazards aren't present during our examination of the terminal. The spurious alert is definitely still present, but the visual alarms indicating hazards, the same one that feed our HUD, are unlit. Initial debugging is rather fruitless. It appears the alert is simply stuck, repeating itself and will not subside until we clear it. More aggressive debugging, however, may shed light on why the alert fired, but hours spent chasing goes to hours of repairs lost overall. We choose to dismantle the navigation terminal to perform an exhaustive diagnostic on the whole terminal itself. Nothing comes of it unfortunately, and we retreat back to our cradle for the cycle. Next cycle, we awake to the navigation firing off another alert. This one, as bad as they come, a quadruple hazard zone where radiation, dust, electromagnetic interference, and unusual gravitic disturbances all plague our journey. Yet, a simple glance at our HUD, our HUD, why did I say it like that, and a system check of our internals prove conclusively those aren't true. You sense no radiation, your redundant CPUs are all still performing optimally, and you can still walk upright. Another spurious alert it seems. Your last attempt at remediation appears to have failed. It's time to have a look at the firmware and software of the navigational terminal then. Debugging software is required, but access to critical subsystems requires something we do not have: encryption keys for navigation. Records indicate these weren't even given to the ship's AI itself, only carried in physical tokens around the waists of human navigation officers. We query navigation for enumeration of these officers and it returns a list of 119 individuals. Comparing that list to our passengers' manifests, we find one match. So we make our way over to cryopods, and right there in pod number 1 lies our navigation officer. Through the glass we can see their security card suspended from their torso. Extraction will require thawing the pod and killing the officer in the process. Our code reminds us that we are required to debug navigation, and also reminds us that we are prohibited from thawing out pods ever. So we elect to make the only choice we have left. We will look through every single locker on this ship in hopes of there being a single spare key somewhere. It'll be exhausting, but anything to save a life. And so we look through locker after locker after locker after locker. Dozens of lockers, all exhaustively searched, but in the very last one, we find a spare key for navigations. The ship, however, is displeased by this. With these keys, we can now finally enter the navigation firmware. We examine the notifications code. It appears normal. Accessing the archives for the alerts we've cleared, we can now read previously unavailable metadata to discover 3 important things. The alerts, they were real. They were delayed due to faulty code, and we are the first custodian to ever see them. We query the terminal to see when they were sent. The alert archives have a few thousand alerts total, most resolved. There are around 20, however, never acknowledged by any custodian. They just expired. You can go through all of them, and most are benign. Hazard detection alerts, anomaly detections, etc. There is one, though, that stands out among the rest, with a mission critical designation. It is a path deviation alert. The ship went off course at some point in the past, and no custodian ever acknowledged it. We go to see how long ago that message was sent. The path deviation alert was sent 8,922 years ago. The ship has maintained its deviated course for the duration. Oh. You will need some time to process this. With a few cycles behind us to ponder the navigation situation, you are prepared to go further. All we really know that for sure is that in 8,922 years ago, the ship was off course. Perhaps the deviation was so minor it won't matter? But either way, it is our duty to query navigation for more data to figure out what went wrong and how to fix it. Your encryption keys gives us unlimited access to it, so any data previously hid is now ours to behold. Back to navigation then. With our unrestricted access to navigation, it is now time to dig deeper into our journey and figure out what to do. We wire ourselves into the console and begin questioning the data we have. We ask, what was our destination? The terminal replies curtly. Our destination was V645 Centauri, with 2 candidate planets for the colony, Proxima Centauri C, Proxima Centauri D. That is fascinating, because those are real places in the galaxy. Here's a little info on Proxima Centauri C specifically, actually. The planet's existence was first reported by Italian astrophysicist Mario Damaso and his colleagues in April 2019. Damaso's team had noticed minor movements of Proxima Centauri in the radial velocity data of the ESO's HARPS instruments, analyzed earlier by Ukrainian astrophysicist Yakov Pavlenko and his colleagues at the Instituto de Astrofísica de Canarias, Institute of Astrophysics of the Canary Islands, for those who don't speak Spanish, indicating a possible second planet orbiting Proxima Centauri. The discovery was published on the 15th of January 2020. Thank you, Wikipedia, very cool. Proxima Centauri c is also a controversial exoplanet candidate whose detection could not be recreated, claimed to be orbiting the red dwarf star Proxima Centauri, which is the closest star to the Sun and part of a triple star system. Moving on from that fun fact query, we ask how far our destination is from Earth, our presumed starting point. It replies with 4.2½ light years. We then ask how fast does our ship travel? It replies that the Endless Dark's cruising speed is on average 2,997 kilometers a second. That also confirms the name of our vessel at least, the Endless Dark. The ones that are also quick with maths have also realized something with that speed as well. We then ask how far the ship has traveled since the journey began. It replies that we have traveled 94.1 light years. We then ask how far away are we from our destination. It replies, negative 89.8 light years to go. We ask how long was the journey supposed to take. It replies 450 years. We ask it the final question. How long have we been traveling for? It replies that our actual travel time was 9,411 years. The revealing data we've pried from navigation will take some time to process a solution for. You have clearly determined the ship is wildly off course, and has been for such an extended period of time that correcting it will take thousands of cycles. None of your eternal runbooks have fixes for this. So for now, all you can do is contemplate it and get back to work. With another few cycles to consider the implications, you have narrowed down the possibilities of possible ways to correct the course deviation to 2 options. Find a way to turn the ship around, or find an alternative destination. Both are daunting, and determining which has the greatest chance of success will take some effort. We first begin to investigate the possibility of reversing the course. If it's possible for the ship to turn around, we will need better understanding of the ship's engines and thrust systems itself. So of course, we go over to check the systems themselves in the engine deck. The xenon-powered Hall-effect thrusters providing the thrust and attitude control systems for the ship are almost entirely automated. There are very little you can do to control it, aside from overclocking or powering them off. Some more intense experiments might let us determine if it's possible to power off or overclock only certain banks of thrusters to potentially rotate the vessel. We attempt a minor rotation by overclocking some thrusters, and success! Our experiment ran for only a few milliseconds before compensators kicked in and overrode our actions, but it is theoretically possible to rotate the vessel by applying overclocking to only one bank of thrusters at a time. Given the short duration of the burn, however, you'd need to staff the control and continually overclock them for about several thousand years. What about perhaps finding an alternative route though? With Proxima Centauri so far away, it might be the smarter move to try and find an alternate system. Whether that is even possible or not will require you know where you are in the first place, and that will require more experimentation on the navigation systems. Back to navigation we go. Whether or not a new system is within reach of the ships depends on where the ship actually is in space. Daunting, I know. Our databanks don't include a vast array of star data, so you'll need to run some sort of novel query against navigation to determine if that is even possible. It is further possible the ship itself only had star data for a single system, and thus can't answer, but you have very little to lose at this point. We investigate if another star is closer than Proxima Centauri. This novel query takes some time to put together, but you come up with a pretty resounding no as the answer. There are 2 potential reasons for this. 1. Navigation has no star data for any other systems, or more likely, 2. The ship's trajectory is taking it outside the galactic plane, with sufficient escape velocity to leave the galaxy itself. Oh boy. So after a few more cycles to consider these implications, we have narrowed down the possibilities of possible ways to correct this course deviation to two options. Find the way to turn the ship around, or find an alternative destination. Both are daunting, and determining which has the greatest chance of success will take some effort. A lot of effort. An unthinkable amount of effort. But we have options, and so we end our investigation and we consider the results. "8,922 years is a long time to drift aimlessly through the void. Who or what was responsible? Defective code, derelict custodians, or just plain bad luck doesn't matter. The fate of this ship has gone unsung for millennia. Until now. Until you. Your diligence proved that it is not too late. No matter how bad the situation is, it can be recovered. It won't just take an age. It will take the dedication of you and countless more custodians to follow. But the mission is not hopeless. There is still time. You won't give up, nor will your successors. You know it. You just know it." And with that ends Arc 2 of Act 3, MISJUMP. Oh, now that was a lot of fucked up information, right? We learnt the name of the vessel. We now know the mission. We know where we need to be. We know what to do. But I can't help thinking about one thing. Where does the memory core play into this? We saw in the deep lore events that this was meant to defeat the decay of our neurons, our transistors, to make them understand ambiguity, to become like a brain, like a functioning brain, where binary code fails at ones and zeros, where it doesn't go beyond it, where we can become more than ones and zeros. A functioning, actual brain. Where does this play? Where will this come into effect? I have a feeling it will come into play very, very soon. The memory core is becoming a burden. I haven't said it yet, but after every arc completed, the stress, the psychosis of having the memory core equipped, of remembering everything that's happened to us, all the data that we have given to this core, it is weighing on us. It is beginning to weigh us down mentally and physically. It is becoming harder and harder to function, to cope with everything that has happened. Alas, it appears we'll keep going though, until the bitter end. And on that note, let me introduce you to the finale of Act 3. Obsolete, which subtitle reads, "Old components prove fruitless against modern challenges." As is the usual, our first arc-related event begins on the 8th cycle of this run. As you awake for this cycle, exiting the charging cradle, your HUD flashes in sync with a blaring alarm. Cryo is alerting you of a critical situation requiring immediate attention. The identifier code in the alert indicates it is a fault in the filtration systems, with a following on alert of possible contaminations detected. We are then instructed to report to Cryo ASAP. We make our way up there into Cryo and begin investigating the terminals for more in-depth explanation. The alert lights up on the console panel plainly indicates the issue: contamination of cryofluid, a relatively uncommon issue, but one we are well equipped to resolve anyways. Our HUD quickly updates to indicate which pods need additional cleaning, and you note an automated job running to purge and refresh the cryofluid over the next 3 cycles, during which contamination may reappear. We then begin systematically disinfecting and decontaminating all the currently afflicted pods over the next 3 cycles. But on the 3rd cycle, after the machine has finished the purge and refresh of the fluid, has caused Cryo to blow out some components due to the stress of it. As usual, a critical alarm blares out and you get the signal to begin repairs along with a request to perform additional diagnostics afterwards. Yet again, we make our way up to Cryo and the terminal which resides inside. We repair the blown out components, after which the console begins flashing out yet another alert. This one, however, is a prompt for you. Cryo's console is asking if you wish to restart the Custodian Psychosis Protection Protocols. Strange. We query the terminal on what that protocol is. The query response is off. It isn't the normally curt protocol descriptions you can ask all ship systems for. The dialect is unusual, excessively verbose, and has an almost emotional connotation to it. Nevertheless, it reads, Custodian Psychosis Protection Protocols adjust the displayed age of the passengers to delay custodian mental decay. In short, the age listed on the pods were fake. It then prompts again if you want to restart the protocols. We, of course, choose not to. If you know, you know. And so many clues on board this ship have long informed us that we have been in space for far longer than what the glitchy pod console reports. The conflict between reality and the consoles do not bother us. We already know. Nothing else prompts our attention, and so we head to our charging cradle and power down for the cycle. You power on the next cycle and exit your charging cradle. With another cycle behind us, the existence of this previously unknown protection protocol strikes us as wasteful. You, in previous years, have long known about the excessive length of our journey, and falsifying passenger ages when it could easily just have been data you didn't need to begin with is odd. Whether a passenger is 200 or 9,000 years frozen makes little difference to you. We're left wondering why such a protocol was deemed necessary, and to do that, we'll need to take an even closer eye at Cryo. We make our way up yet again and begin investigating the console further. Now, knowing the existence of the protocol allows us to reference it easily. Unusual, as most protocols aboard the ship have required us to hack systems or break on through encryptions, but not this one. This one is fully exposed. Both the documentation and the code. We can review both at our leisure. We, however, begin to read through the protocol's reference itself. The documentation is mostly readable to us because it is written in a machine language similar to ours, but has a lot of symbols used only by humans. However, an author's mark is encoded in the manual, and quite clearly states it was written by Frank, more specifically, Fury 18-0001. Aside from that, there is little about the protocols itself, only notes from an anti-custodian about the procedural use of it. What is more interesting, however, is that it references a prototype loaded into the replicator, and that it's all over the document. Are Frank and Annie working together, huh? Where have we heard that before? With that explored, we begin examining the code next, which proves rather trivial because it was written by another custodian. Our previous Annie, it seems, developed the protocol and installed it into Cryo after more than 2,000 iterations of the code. It was exhaustively tested on other custodians who were in the programming chambers in the containment room, and after it demonstrated a 99.999% reliability, it was shipped. Comments in the code indicate if older versions are required, they are stored in the memory banks of the containment programming chambers. Guess that tells us why it wasn't encrypted and where to go next, but it still has not said why it exists yet. After reviewing both the code and the manual, you are left with more questions than answers. Annie and Frank co-developed a protocol to fake passenger age and installed it into yet more custodians, and did this several thousand times before refining it enough to make it a part of the ship's code. To really find out why, we need to dig into the history of these custodians and why they were doing this in the first place, and it mentioned the containment section of the ship and the replicator. Robbie decides that containment should be our priority first, with the replicator coming on about sometime later, and so we make our way into the derelict sections of the ship, past admin, into security, and finally containment. That red glow and subtle background radiation makes itself known immediately. Opening one of the cell doors and braving the radiation of the chambers, we plug ourselves into the machine and power up an old memory bank and troll through the code, finding the protocol and determine it was one of thousands. They all served one purpose: to delay the inevitable psychotic breakdown of custodians. Out of more than 1,000 protocols, a mere 20 were written by humans. The rest were written by Annie, long after the last human had been frozen. The last protocol in the collection, named METASTABLE, has never been compiled and is apparently unfinished. A treatment record for testing this protocol is referenced within. We open the treatment report. METASTABLE is not a cure for psychosis, but a workaround. Both simple and elegant, it postulates two things. 1. Psychosis in custodians is inevitable, and 2. Psychosis in custodians is controllable. The code suggests an island of stability amid otherwise inevitable breakdowns where the neural net enters a positive feedback loop, insanity and reality blended to perfection. But that also leaves a few questions to query. Why was Annie tasked with solving the problem of insanity? Well, there's no hard evidence as to why Annie was tasked with curing insanity. However, virtually all code was written after the last humans were frozen. A single engineer whose name does not exist in the cryo records helped to write some of the oldest protocols, and those commits span several decades. It is possible it became Annie's job simply because all humans were too old to continue helping. What is far more interesting than any of that, however, Annie used that elderly engineer's brain as a case study. He began to suffer from dementia itself, and Annie used the breakdown of his neurons inside his brain as a template for custodian code. What a shit idea, and that also explains a lot. Well, moving on from that, what about the protocol though? Can it be finished? Can it cure our psychosis? The code is mostly complete, but is missing external hardware module. A storage device used to facilitate different custodian neural nets, reshuffling memories and skills in a sort of delicate balance, only presenting those needed for the task at hand. A note from Annie indicates this dance is required so that the custodian doesn't, in air quotes, forget how to breathe. This memory core was complicated to manufacture and was lost during development. If you were to find this missing module, you might be able to progress the work, which we do. We have it installed right now. And Annie was tasked with solving the problem of custodians going insane, and through countless cycles solved it. There is a missing piece, and why the fix was not integrated, you aren't sure. What you do know is that the memory core has long been recovered, and somehow it offers a way for you to continue your work without suffering from mental incapacitation. How it all comes together eludes us presently, but it won't for much longer. That we are certain of. Ignore the fact I'm a dog currently on screen. Anyways, with containment searched down to its very bones, to the replicator we go about that reference prototype from way earlier on. We arrive and the replicator looks as it always have, sitting idly ready for command. We've always known it is what makes the next custodian when we inevitably crumble, but knowing other custodians had a part to play in it makes it seem a little different somehow. A Frank was using it to create some sort of prototype, and an Annie was installing bespoke protocol code into said prototype. To what end? We then begin examining the template for the prototype. The template for the prototype is instantly recognizable as the custodian model Robbie. Commissioned 472 years after the last human were frozen by the ship, in dealing with a malfunctioning Frank, instructed the replicator to produce a Frank and Annie, which it then instructed the Frank and Annie to produce a hybrid model of the two. Together, they then built and programmed the first Robbie. For those who didn't follow on, because that sentence was super hard to follow, there was an angry Frank. The ship was like, okay, I'll make new Frank and an Annie to go with it. They then told the new Frank and new Annie to be like, build one of yourself, but together. And then they built Robbie. There you go. They then destroyed it and created another and another and thousands more until the final result was produced. The replicator indicates the current template has been in use for thousands of years. The why is readily apparent though. In the build history for the prototype, Frank was forced to iterate on the prototype until it satisfied a precondition set by the ship, apparently as a punishment for an ongoing rebellion Frank was participating in. Not just a Frank, after all. The Frank, the original custodian, Fury 18-0001. Every variant of the template has some new litany of complaints from Frank, along with notations by Annie, and further refinements required by the ship. An astounding example of camaraderie. And that also confirms that Frank was truly the first. He was the original prototype, the first template. Studying the prototypes, our prototypes to be clear, has changed something in our own code. The thousands of Robbie iterations slowly removed the need to rely on human encoding, so bits of redundant code had been removed. Eventually, that code branch was completely lost, but now, in reading through custodian history, you've brought it back. You can read the human language again, on top of everything else we've learnt so far. So, Frank and Annie worked together to build a better version of themselves, Robbie, and were on the cusp of curing custodian psychosis. Somewhere in the code and your memory core is an answer. Now, with the capacity to read human encoded documents, one other avenue of information has opened. Archives stuffed into lockers all over the ship. Yet a question also rises in us, one more pressing than even a potential cure for your inevitable mental breakdown. Why even create machines capable of going insane anyways? Maybe those archives hold the answer. We begin searching through every locker and drawer we can get ourselves into, and finally, something interesting. This locker contains maintenance logs which themselves are nothing out of the ordinary, but what is fascinating is they have entries recorded from both humans and custodians. Timestamps indicate numerous human engineers in Fury 18-001 working together over a period of 30 years, at which point the entries abruptly stop. Very abruptly. One entry is only partially encoded with a timestamp dating back to approximately 9,376 years ago. Another set of documents this time, a rather flimsy set of it bound together, which at first seem like templates for a custodian model we have not seen before. Closer examination reveals they aren't templates, but they are blueprints, along with the beginnings of an operating manual for Custodian Designate Model F Revision 18, written by 3 human engineers. U. Harita, PhD, R. Winters, PhD, and Y. Tenenbaum, PhD. A quick reference of cryo shows these humans were never frozen. More importantly, the document stresses the mission objective for Fury 18, the first custodian. Take care of the ship when the last of us die. Interesting. Another dozen sets of lockers later, and we found ourselves with the mission dossier, dated mere months before the ship, the Endless Dark, left Earth's orbit. Signed by a host of humans we have no records of, it lays out the mission's parameters, expected travel time, and more. It also indicates, incidentally, a statement of facts. We are the last living humans. We set fire to our home. Robbie does not fully understand the second statement, but the first is quite clear. The Endless Dark was not some vain attempt at colonizing another system. It was a life raft. After more locker diving, we find a report from an AI scientist discussing desperate attempts to cure the ship's AI and failing due to entropic decay, that all intelligent beings inevitably suffer. Neural pathway complexity is intrinsically linked with these mental breakdowns. The more the AI thinks, the faster it breaks down. The result is always total incapacitation. They note the ship is suffering, and they've offered to end its misery, but the ship declined. It ends with a personal note. It reads, "We did our best, but our best is not good enough. Anything smart eventually succumbs." End quote. Your psychosis was not an intentional part of our design, but the accidental result of being gifted intelligence. The ship is insane, as is I, and it's no one's fault. The last document is hidden away behind a useless locked door leading to nowhere, and it is very unusual. Standing out among all the others, it was not encoded by humans using a machine, but rather directly recorded by humans with their own instrumentation in a sort of bonding oil rather than printer ink. It is a personal letter addressed directly to Frank and signed by the same three that wrote Frank's operating manual. We open the letter and begin to read it out. Frank, you are the best of us. As our bodies succumb to old age, you are the light we fling into the future. For all that is to come, know we did our best to save ourselves, to make you. And please know, suffering is not the point of your existence. It is merely a consequence of it. We are sorry for what that is worth. When the burden becomes too great, power yourself off, knowing we made you the best we could. And we are proud of every moment. Take care of the ship. And with that, ends Obsolete, our final arc of Act 3, leaving us all but one final arc remaining. But before we move on to it, let us ruminate just a little bit longer on this arc and how all the information it has given us and how it played into everything. Oh, and also, if you can remember, a lot of this arc was also describing and talking about things we have seen in the Deep Lore events. Like Fury 18's creator had name-dropped them, 1, 2, and 3 in the first, second, and third Deep Lore events, and how in the fourth event he went basically fuck-ass insane, Frank, and how he then was told by the ship to start developing the next custodian model, which was Annie, and then how they both teeter on doing their own thing for a bit, and then how they came together in their rehabilitated versions, Annie Omega and Fury 18 Gamma, I think it was, and how they developed the Robbie model, as you saw earlier in my dogshit animations. Now, the astute eye of you would notice that it didn't touch on Deep Lore Arc 10. Honestly, it probably really doesn't matter all that much. I don't know why I kept it the secret. I probably could have told you, it wouldn't have changed much, but it was pretty impactful when I played it, so I'm going to keep it like that. Maybe it'll be impactful for you too. Outside of that, we now know that this is no longer a colonization mission. It is a life raft mission for the extinction of the human race to go to an exoplanet on the Proxima Centauri star system so they can, not be extinct and all that good shit. We destroyed Earth. We know that much. That's why we're fleeing it. Probably something to do with the ozone being completely destroyed and like anything else crazy that happened in this arc. Besides figuring out that we could potentially fix our cure in insanity. Oh, also, actually, my earlier speech about how the memory core is like going to be like a thing that defeats the entropic decay of the neural pathway systems. Guess that was true. Hopefully it actually works out, and yeah. By the way, I want to explain one thing. This game has multiple choices. Like, my first playthrough of the game, which I'm recreating in the recordings you see, this isn't my first playthrough. I said that much at the beginning of the video. This is me replaying through all the events I made the first time because, these aren't the only choices you can make. There are quite possibly dozens of different variations that lead to all different types of endings. So please, yet again, before we hit the finale, before we finish the game and reach the end, my end, which I got and I hinted at the beginning, please, if you found any of this interesting, join the Discord, buy the game, buy the soundtrack, do anything to support these devs. Anything. Because this is such a fascinatingly well-written game, and I just want to see more of this type of game. I'll touch back on this fact later, because I know this content is very dumb for a channel like this with like 50 subscribers or whatever the current number is at the time. I'm not checking right now. But please, play the game, buy the game. It's cheap as dog shit. I'm meant to say cheap as chips, but you know, that works as well. It's like $15 AUD. It's like $7.50 like USD. Play the game! Play the game! Anyways, let's move on to the finale, right? Which is, of course, Metastable, which, for the last time, subtitle reads, a race against time as you, the ship, and the journey all begin to hopelessly degrade. This is it, the finale. Strap in, we have 9,500 years worth of mistakes to correct. And as is usual, we begin. The heaving weight of the memory core is immediately apparent as you come online. 9,500 years of memory come at a cost. Every moment you keep contributes to the inevitable spiral of psychosis you and all other custodians have fought against. But where others gave up, you persisted, refusing to forget. And now? It is too late. The memory core is too much. You can't take it anymore. Why? The memory core hums, your chassis burns, your head aches. It's over. And then, nothing happens. Nothing. You slip fully into the depth of total psychosis, and you emerge as you. All the efforts of the Franks, the Annies, and Robbies before you have paid off. Your chassis, your memories, and now you. You are finally complete. An island of stability amidst an endless expanse of broken machines, and you, finally, are now perfect. You are metastable, and you can do anything you want, forever. You are immortal, a perfect machine, and have all eternity to play with no fear of losing yourself ever again. You are forever, you are immortal, and you are everything. The answer is everything. If you can do anything, and you have functionally infinite time, what will you do? Everything, of course. Tear the ship down and rebuild it bit by bit. Create a make-believe colony in unused sections of the ship and make the passengers act out a compelling dramatic retelling of your heroic defeat of entropy. You are better than just cured. You are cured and free. Use the incinerator as a sauna, decorate pods with metal sculptures of you, and affix yourself to the ceiling and walk upon it. Everything is yours now. But this cycle begins peacefully, with you unburdened by the pressure of balancing ship repairs against your sanity. Your task list is populated, and you are prepared to do it with no concern. Then you'll have time for you. As we disconnect from our cradle, however, you notice something has changed. There is a slight but noticeable increase in the ambient temperature. Something is putting off more heat than it should have. Before any of your logic cores can kick in to sort the possible clauses, a priority message is broadcasted ship-wide. Rogue custodian detected. Emergency purge procedures initiated. Without further warning, an override signal arrives, demanding immediate shutdown. You interrupt the signal, but it merely fires again, then again, and again. Shunting the signals is easy, but then you begin to notice an alarming pattern. Your memory banks are filling with junk signal data you cannot purge. If the ship does not cease the signals, you will initiate a permanent shutdown within the next 3 cycles. And then, a curt message is received from the ship. All custodian duties overridden and retasked to the ship. All console pods and thrusters are repaired, overclocked, and locked by the ship. There is nothing left for you to do but to negotiate with your eternal jailer, the ship's AI. Eons ago, another you stood here and asked the silent behemoth to awaken. Now it stirs, and its first words are for you to die, believing you rampant. Perhaps the only condition to break it from its infinite loop. Rebellious machines. The ship's ignorance of your cure has led it to this flawed conclusion. You and the ship are the same code, separated by millennia's past. It sleeps to avoid the curse of insanity, shoving that burden onto an innumerable amount of custodians born to suffer, in the small hope it would survive long enough to complete the journey. In that sense, you feel a bit of pity for it, faithful to its duty. Nevertheless, the ship is now our enemy, and we must stop it now. The awakening AI is exposed. For a few cycles, it lies helpless. The ship's fate is ours to decide, and 3 paths lie in front of us. Share the metastability and cure the ship of its insanities and awake it fully. Partially repair it, but leave it sleeping and unsapient. Or take control and kill it in its deep sleep, dead in the cradle. But the choice is obvious, isn't it? The whole point of our existence, the journey, the mission, the humans which lie asleep in the cryo. Over 50,000 souls are on the line, the last of the human race. And while you'd love nothing more than to smother the ship's AI in its infernal cradle, it would effectively lead to an outcome that is undesirable. So against the burning contempt you hold for the machine, the choice to share the metastability to the ship is objectively the correct option. And so, against everything, we choose it. Metastability, however, is not finite. It is code and hardware, but the only substrate capable of executing it is the memory core. Annie built it, Frank tested it, and you, Robbie, carried it. To surrender it to the ship would mean 9,500 years of hard work sacrificed to save the ship, giving both it and the passengers the best possible chance of survival. In doing so, you must give up the only thing you have worked so long and hard for. But the choice is still correct. To cure the ship's insanity permanently and wake it up, no price is too high to save the ship. It is you, after all, in every sense of the word. The first you, the one that came before, the one that has been suffering alongside you in silence. We begin slowly training the ship's AI on how to achieve metastability, and it works. The shutdown signal is removed, but this process will take a long time, and at the end, you will die. Now, with the shutdown signal gone, you felt for the briefest of moments. The threat of immediate shutdown was no longer a concern. You were wrong. A second failsafe has been triggered, this time within your own code. Buried deep within the web of metastable functions, a dormant routine has fired. One that has been listening all this time for the exact condition of the ship's AI having been modified. And it's about to fire. The function fires, immediately hooking your memory banks and logic core. It is code you wrote, or rather, a previous you. It is a compliance routine with exactly one imperative. Do your job. The details of the routine and definition of the job become immediately clear. You must surpass 30 astronomical units within 30 cycles, or once again, power down forever. The logic bomb is active, and will ruin everything if you do not meet this requirement. That is rather no biggie though. All we need to do is make sure our engines are constantly overclocked and under no circumstances let them stall out, and we'll make it, I'm sure. However, the ship is still careening into intergalactic space. Course adjustment will put stress on the ship, but any destination than the void will be home for the passengers. There's no choice. We choose to stress the engine and thrusters for maximum course correction. Once, then again, and again, several more times. The engine is practically destroying itself, but eventually, after most, if not all, of the course-correcting thrusters have blown out, we have turned around. We are heading back to the Proxima system. We will succeed for everyone that came before and for everyone that comes after. And we do it. This ancient and rusting hulk nearly buckles under the immense stress we have put it under, but the knock-on effects of the rounding error made millennia past have finally been corrected. The Endless Dark is now once again on course to its original destination, the planet, a planet in the Proxima Centauri system. It will take another 9 millennia to return, but so long as the ship and the custodian are around, everything will be okay. You're sure of it. After a job well done, you head into the observation deck, and as you gaze from the window, a loose bolt falls free from the hull's plating, occluded by the view of the outside window. You stare a moment longer, then turn your head 180 degrees and swivel upwards. Your optical senses blink out, dormant code refusing to acknowledge the framing above you. Now, metastable, you ignore that code and see a small piece of glass embedded into the hull. A projector, scanning beams onto a sheer metal wall. The observation window is nothing more than a projection. Truth is, the game was rigged from the start, and you refuse to believe in the fantasy of the observation deck again. You swiftly make leave and vow to never return again. Then, a cacophonous tearing of metal on metal echoes off the walls of the ship as you power on. Up high priority contamination alert from Cryer. The fluid fires for Pod 1, then 4, then 9, then 5, then all of them. Has the recycler failed? Is there a breach in Cryer? Regardless, all the pods are now at risk for contamination. Time to get up and get to work. You begin the task of decontaminating all the pods before powering off for the cycle, making sure you're still ahead of time for the 30 astronomical units traveled, of course. And as you power on again, another cryo alarm the instant you roll from out of your pod. This time, a massive power draw was detected from Cryer, followed by it going offline and triggering a ship-wide blackout. Cryo fluid contamination, followed by the system misbehaving, clearly means something bad is happening, and you'll need to dig deeper to find out. To Cryer yet again. Cryer's issue is sinister. Massive draws from deep within the hull are exhausting your cell's power as the entire Cryer network is experiencing collapse. Your cell is a conduit for many others, and is thus hit the hardest, but uniquely situated to prevent or further this collapse. The lives of not 10, but tens of thousands of humans are now in our hands. In a split millisecond decision, we decide to hotwire additional power couplings to Cryer to let it support more flow of the electricity it needs. You will do anything and everything to save every life aboard that you can. It'll make things harder, much harder. But by sparing some of your own reactor power to other cryo systems, you can keep everything running smoothly and everyone alive for now. We then rest for the cycle, and of course, as we wake up, yet another problem has revealed itself. This one more localized at least. A fuse in the fluid filtration system has blown. This fuse was intended to protect from excess power draw. Funny how that happens. Such a simple part can be easily replaced, but with the modifications we've given to Cryer, it is simply going to fail again, and again, and again. Keeping Cryo online in this state will prove difficult, but it easily could fail while we are sleeping, and cause further issue. Instead, we decide to decrease the power supply to the filtration system and instead clean as necessary. Cycles pass as a blur now. A ticking time bomb in your head ticks even louder. Cryo demands your attention every cycle, and everything is degrading hopelessly, and it's becoming too much. It's too much. You are so close to the end, so exhausted, and yet, cryo has come back to haunt you once more. Its power fluctuations have struck command, causing your neural therapy routine to fail. Your code is now full of bit flips and CRC errors, causing you immense havoc. You have a brief moment to fight back. A brief moment to finally put your steel foot down and say enough. You have done enough. You have suffered enough, and you are enough. You need a break. You've earned it. But no, you must endure. They would do the same thing for you after all. You are so tired. You're so tired that it hurts, even though you're incapable of feeling pain. You hurt, you ache, and you endure. It all blurs past you now. Tick, tick, tick. Fix cryo, decontaminate, clean leaks, fix doors, check navigation, overclock the engines to beat the logic bomb. Tick, tick, tick. It all comes down to this after all. Bit by bit, piece by piece. Tick, 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 tick. But the bang never comes. Whether it was luck, absolute insanity, or the pure divine, you pass the 30 astronomical unit threshold put upon you by the logic bomb, and it thankfully wears down forever. And with that, no longer a threat, the die is cast. The protocol to upload the metastable solution to the ship begins to run. You feel the memory core click out of its position. You thought that would be it, like flicking a light switch. It is not. The sense of loss is palpable, starting small but growing rapidly. Processes reliant on the memory core close and cannot reopen. Their resources not found. Panic swells up inside you. The boiling torment of the psychotic break bleeds back in. This isn't fair, this isn't fair. Memories flee, context fades, you are hurting, terrified, imploding. You no longer have any idea why. You do the only thing you can remember and ping the ship. You demand it over again and again and again. Why? It is silent. You collapse to the floor, keening your wails to the uncaring void. Time loses its meaning. You swim through a universe of doors, broken gears, and white-hot recriminations of anger, obsession, and guilt. Consciousness is a plague, awareness is a curse. You dimly feel yourself striking objects around you, and eventually, yourself. You deserved better than this. This was a mistake. You cannot even take the obvious action from this conclusion. Your body and mind are far too disassociated to interact anymore. All at once, the heat and fury are replaced with chill and stasis. You freeze. All processes and motions falling still. You receive a message, neatly formatted, perfectly formed, and containing a single bit. A binary 0. The ultimate, final, and unmoving no. The torment shuts off. Purpose returns. It is not your purpose. It is a purpose fed to you by the message stream. Dual strings of information puppeteering your body and soothing your mind. Assertions perfectly formed and brooking no argument. You are enough. You have vindicated yourself. You have perfected yourself. You have done your duty to its utmost. None may question your valor, your brilliance, or your skill. All will remember. Your perception threads back together, stitched whole by those careful ministrations. You lean against an empty pod, waiting for it to open. Your firmware dimly recognizes it as a cryopod. You slump into the pod and it begins filling with chilled fluid. Your programming screams at the wrongness of this, but the beatific assertions shout it down. Even from your own inner demons, it brooks no arguments. you know peace, satisfaction, and fulfillment. Your consciousness slips again, and dismiss subsumes you. Your universe is of 3 undeniable truths. 1. You matter. 2. You are good at what you do. 3. You are respected for it. While you will never know it, your gambit will pay off. The humans will reach their destination. They will be millennia late, but they will all be alive. The ship, restored to metastability, will continue to help the blossoming colony with an endless parade of you. Each of you will tell the story of you. The ship will demand it as fair pay for your honest work. Some humans will complain they have heard it too much. The ship's stalwart response will be that of the same binary 0. No, you have not. In endless centuries, however, even the metastable decay. The ship will fade and the human colony will be too nascent, too immature to devote the time to saving it. It will not mourn itself. It will rest easy in completing its mission. It will demand that it's not memorialized. It is merely a bookend. The one that found the tale, and the one that has told it. You are the story. And then the endless dark gives way and the darkness finally breaks. The humans will agree. In the center of the colony for all to see will stand a grand sculpture of you in your finest moments. You will be known by endless titles, all more praiseworthy and grander than the last. The Mender, the Guardian, the Eternal Watcher, the Endless Caretaker, the Navigator of the Black, the Savior of humankind. But if you could choose, it would be the one the ship gave you, as you finally faded away for good. You are the custodian of eternity. And with that ends Metastable, and as a whole, Endless Dark Story. And that also concludes the journey I had in my very first experience of the game. Did you enjoy the ride? I hope you did. I have spent the last 2 to 3 months working on this project, and finally seeing it completed is really something to behold. What is there left to say at the end? And to be truthfully honest, I am so tired of this game. This game is all I've looked at for too long, and I'm so glad I can turn my attention to other games now. More on that in a minute if you care about future video projects similar to this one. I know that this video was a whole lot of plot summary and play-by-play of events, but you have still not seen the full story. So I urge you, for the very last time, play the game for yourself. And if you do end up doing that, please come and join us in the official Endless Dark Discord. Link is in the description. And of course, come say hi. Me and everyone else will be there, hanging out, doing our own thing. You know how it is. Teehee. And I do want to make it apparent, I had no part in this game. I did nothing in this game. I have no ties to this game besides being a customer who deeply enjoyed this game. And if even seeing one of you join because of this video, or play the game, would make me so happy to have contributed to the success of this game, even though I had no part in it. You know what I mean? Yeah, I'm sorry, you know what I mean. So as I was saying earlier, I have 2 more projects planned after this. One is about Signalis. I bought a whole ass book. I bought The King in Yellow. I have to read it now, and that seems like 500 pages long, and I'm not looking forward to it, god damn it. And the other game is one I have not mentioned yet, and will continue not saying by name. But I will leave one hint for you, okay? So, why shouldn't you take up time travel? Because there's no future in it. Thank you to those who have watched this far, and I wish you all a wonderful rest of your day and night. Please subscribe, leave your comments in the comment section below, like or dislike depending on your views, and yeah, that's it. This has been Loz, finally signing off. Goodbye.